What's going on, guys? It's Nick, War Picks. We're here today. We're discussing UFC 301. We're breaking down Pantoja versus Ursig, all the other fights. We'll let you know what the best bets are and what you need to know. So breaking down the fights, starting in the prelims, we start with the first fight of the night, which is a banger in the flyweight division. We got Alessandro Costa coming up against Kevin Borjas. Alessandro Costa, very tough, well-rounded Brazilian flyweight. He's 1-2 in the UFC with two of his losses, one being against Steve Ursig, who's fighting for the belt later this evening, and the other being to Amir Albazi. Both the guys that he lost to, very high-level competition in the UFC. He's 1-2. He's facing Kevin Borjas, who recently made his debut about 6 months ago against Joshua Van. Joshua Van, very highly touted boxer in the flyweight division. Looking at this fight, Kevin Borjas is a finisher. He hasn't finished in the UFC yet. He's 0-1. He finished a lot before the Contender Series, didn't get a finish in his Contender Series fight. I'm looking for him to go out there and be explosive, push Alessandro Costa, make the veteran use his skills. Ultimately, I like this fight going over on rounds. We'll see. Fight number 2, we've got Ismail Bonfim versus Vince from Hell Pichel. This one's pretty straightforward. Ismail Bonfim, very highly touted prospect. He's 1-1 in the UFC. His first fight was a knockout victory over Terrence McKinney. And then his last fight, he came up against Benoit Saint-Denis, where he was submitted at the end of the first round. Kind of looked like he was gassing that fight. People are wondering, is it a fraud check of Ismail Bonfim? The guy's 19-4. I'm not too sure. Vince Pichel, 7-3 in the UFC, longtime vet. He's had a 2-year layoff. His last win was a decision victory over Marco Madsen. It's going to be tough for Vince to get back in here against a guy like Bonfim, very explosive in the early rounds. If Vince can get out of the first round and avoid that early onslaught in the second round, I think it's going to be a good fight for Vince. I think if he drags it into the later rounds, Bonfim's going to have trouble. If he can avoid the submission in that first round, might be some underdog money on Vince Pichel later in the fight here. For fight number 3, we've got Diane Barboza versus Anesta Karakati. Both women are 0-0 in the UFC, both coming off a Contender Series victory. Diane Barboza won via armbar in the Contender Series, which her fight was all right. It was all right. We'll just put it that way. She is 1-1 versus UFC competition, though, outside of the UFC, with a victory over Karine Silva, who we saw last week. She's a very dominant woman. She lost to Josiane Nunes by finish, I believe, who is a power puncher for the strawweight division. Going against Ernesta Karakati, 0-0 in the UFC, decision victory in the Contender Series, same thing. She's a decision fighter. She's fought low level of competition outside of the UFC. I believe her best opponent's record might have been like 2-0, 3-0, something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how she deals with the competition. I like Diane Barboza just because she's fought that high level competition. For fight number 4, we've got Mauricio Ruffi versus Jamie Mullarkey. And this is a tough fight for Jamie Mullarkey here. I think that the UFC is putting him against a guy in Ruffi who is a finisher, who's going to come out there and is going to want to finish the fight. Mullarkey, 5-5 in the UFC. He's known for always providing the fans with great fights. This, however, I think going against Mauricio Ruffi is a fight where he's going to have to make it a little bit boring. I think he's going to have to wrestle this guy. I think he's going to have to take him down, make him tired, because Ruffi, very explosive guy. When he fought in the Contender Series, he was an underdog to Raymond Magomed, and he wasn't supposed to win, basically. The way the commentary team was talking about it, this guy wasn't supposed to win. He went out there and he put on a performance. He beat up Magomed for 2.5 rounds before finishing him in the third. I think Jamie Mullarkey needs to take down. He needs a win bad. It's going to be tough against Ruffi. We'll see. Going into fight number 5, we've got Joaquim Neto BJJ Silva going up against my buddy Drakkar Klose. Note, Silva is 6-4 in the UFC with the most recent victory coming as a decision over Clay Guida, and Drakkar Klose 8-2 in the UFC. His most recent victory was a slam KO versus Joe Solecki. Very interesting fight here. Joaquim Silva, very strong individual. He has a very good shape for his body, and he throws his hooks with a lot of power. This guy is an explosive fighter. He calls himself Neto BJJ, but personally, I don't think he's much of a BJJ guy. He's got a really strong guillotine. Other than that, I haven't seen him put any submissions up from his back. I think for Drakkar here, getting close, take the gas out of him, take him down. You can hang out in his full guard, just pound him out for the first round. This guy is going to lose half his strength in the second round. I think the longer you keep this fight going, the better chance you have of finishing Silva late. I think Jakar stays disciplined here. He takes him down. He wins this in late second round finish here over Neto BJJ. Which brings us to the sixth fight. We've got Jean Silva versus William Gomis. Jean Silva 1-0 in the UFC with his win coming over Weston Wilson, who, for those of you who don't know, Weston Wilson, probably a really nice dude. 6'3" featherweight. Not gonna work out. Probably one of the weaker chins. Dives for heel hooks. Not a really good fighter overall, but I would never tell him that to his face. Jean Silva went in there. He dominated him for one round before knocking him out at the end of the round. He's going against William Gomis this weekend. William Gomis coming off of a KO body kick versus Giannis Kimori. He's 3-0 in the UFC. Every time I watch William Gomis, I look at his fight style and I think this guy's gonna get taken down. He is 3-0 in the UFC, so he keeps proving me wrong. His fight style, he has a interesting stance to say the least. His feet are like this far apart from each other when he's standing at all times. It's kind of like Sean Strickland, but it's 3-0 again. Deceptively good, this guy. Every time I think he's gonna lose, he wins. So with that being said, power puncher versus the deceptively good William Gomis. I'm gonna take Gomis as long as he can keep his back off the cage and avoid the takedown. I think he'll be in a good shout for this fight. Which leads us to Elvis Bremer versus Maidabek Orabai in the seventh fight of the night. Elvis Bremer, 3-0 in the UFC, recent win, KO over Kanan Krzyzewski. He's fought guys like Garam Kutaladze, Zubaira Tuhugov. His level of competition is really, really high. And Maidabek Orabai, he's 1-0 in the UFC with his only victory coming via neck crank versus Uros Medic, who we saw last week. Both these guys, very, very, very technical fighters. I think that this is going to be your sleeper for the fight of the night. If this stays standing, which I believe it'll be Elvis Bremer's job to keep standing, I think there's going to be an interesting striking match because Orabai, he's technically a grappler, but this guy is very well-rounded. Elvis Bremer, obviously, very well-rounded, comes from the Shuto box style. This is going to be a banger of a fight. If I had to bet, I might take Orabai late round, either third round or decision. We'll find out. Which brings us to fight number 8, Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Yasmin Lucindo. Karolina, career resurgence. She had at one time gone on a losing streak of 5 losses in a row. Now we're not talking about that as much. Her last fight was a decision win versus Diana Belbita, and that pushed her win streak to 4 in a row, and don't look now, Karolina has 4 wins in a row, I guess. She's going up against Yasmin Lucindo. Yasmin Lucindo is 2-1 in the UFC. She's a very highly touted prospect. Her only loss coming to Yasmin Geragori in her debut. And her most recent win was a arm triangle versus Poliana Viana. I think Yasmin Lucindo, going into her debut versus Geragori, she was a very highly touted prospect. I thought that there was a chance that she could upset Geragori. They had a fight of the night that night, didn't go her way, but since then she's rallied off 2 straight wins. I think this girl's a really good prospect in the division. I think going against Karolina on a 4-fight win streak is a very good test of her skills. Karolina's showed good form. We're going to be interested to see how this fight goes. I think if Lucindo can use her kickboxing, she's a smaller fighter, but if she can use her jab and her power to keep this fight in close and keep Karolina on the fence, I think Lucindo can pull this upset off. Which leads us to our last prelim fight of the night, Joanderson Britow versus Jack Shore. Joanderson Britow is a finisher in any phrase of the word. He is a finisher. This guy goes out there and he finishes people. His last fight was a ninja choke victory over Jonathan Pierce in the second round, in a fight where he was kind of getting beaten up by Jonathan Pierce. He got taken down, he looked tired, he looked just like he was trying anything to get him out of there. And he rallied and got the ninja choke versus JSP, so that was a good fight. He's going against Jack Shore. Jack Shore 6-1 in the UFC. His most recent victory was a rear naked choke over Amir Khani. Jack Shore needed that victory. He was 5-1 before that. His only loss in the UFC coming right before that to Ricky Simon. So being that he faced a lot of difficulties versus Ricky Simon with that takedown and that short, compact body style, I think he's in for a tough fight versus Britow, who carries a lot of the similar traits that Ricky Simon has. I think Jack Shore is going to have to avoid that early onslaught of Britow. Hopefully, if he wants to win this, I think he's going to have to take him down. I think he's going to have to ground and pound him and take a lot of that life out of him in the first couple of rounds. Look for a late finish from Shore here. If not, Britow might knock his head out in the first round. So breaking down the main card, we start in the middleweight division. We've got Paul Bearju Craig versus Kyle Baralho. Paul Craig, longtime veteran in the UFC. We know him, 9-7-1. Always a finisher, coming from the light heavyweight division. This is, I believe, his third fight now at the middleweight division. He is 1-1. He's coming off a rear naked choke loss to Brendan Allen. He's going to be fighting Kyle Baralho here. Kyle Baralho, 5-0 in the UFC, coming off of a decision win versus Abbas Magomedov. I think Kyle Baralho has the tools to become a future champion. He's fighting Paul Craig here, where he's going to play Paul Craig's game. He will take down Paul Craig, and he will try and submit Paul Craig, which ultimately gives Paul Craig a path to victory, being a submission fighter and a finisher. I think this will be an interesting fight, but I look for Kyle Baralho to get the finish with a submission here. That's where your money is, a submission over Paul Craig, and then look for Kyle Baralho to make a call out inside the top 10. This is Kyle Baralho's year to get that belt in the middleweight division. Fight 11, we've got Michel Pereira versus Ihor Potieria. Michel Pereira was known as that big, explosive, flashy striker that might gas out. In his recent form, he's won 7 straight fights, a lot of those fights being finishes, and he's fighting Ihor Potieria, 2-3 in the UFC, coming off of a decision victory versus Robert Brzeziak. His only other victory as a knockout versus Shogun. This light heavyweight, Potieria, is a very slow twitch light heavyweight. I think he's going to have trouble against the much faster Michel Pereira. Look for Pereira to finish him in the early round 1. If not, I think Pereira can take it all the way to the decision. I think he's got the tools to beat him everywhere. And yeah, I don't see Potieria offering Pereira much in terms of a fight. That'll take us to fight number 12, which is Lionheart versus Vitor Petrino. This one is a interesting fight, as you've got the veteran in Lionheart going against Petrino. Petrino 4-0 in the UFC. Most recent victory was a decision win against Tyson Pedro. I wouldn't read too much into that decision victory, though, as the pace of that fight wasn't the highest the entire fight. I think it was a very slow-paced fight from what I remember. And I still think of Petrino as an explosive finisher. Don't let that decision sway you either here. He's going up against Lionheart, who Lionheart was recently finished by Khalil Roundtree. Still has aspirations for the title, but I think this is going to be a tough fight going against the prospect in Petrino. I think the keys for Lionheart would be to take him to deep water here. I think Petrino is an explosive guy, and he has to move forward, Petrino, for his style to work. I think if Petrino is backing up, that's really tough for him to pursue his game plan while backing up. So for Lionheart, push him back, take him to deep waters. For Petrino, move forward, follow your jab, take this guy's head off. You can do it, you know? Which will take us to the co-main event. Co-main event, we've got the returning Jose Aldo after a 2-year layoff where he did some boxing, he did some bare knuckle, I think. 2-year layoff. His last fight coming against Merab, where he lost the decision. He was taken down, I think, 100 times that fight. 2 years off is a long time, but for him, he's going against a striker, a very, very technical kickboxer in Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan Martinez, 6 fights in a row he's won. 6 fights in a row, with 2 of those victories coming by leg kick stoppage. His most recent victory was a leg kick stoppage versus Adrian Yanez, who is a prospect in the bantamweight division. I think this is a very difficult fight for Jose Aldo. These guys at the weigh-ins this week, they have been forehead to forehead. There's a lot of passion going into this fight. I think one thing I saw on film was that Jonathan Martinez has been knocked out via Davy Grant. That was a body shot, overhand right combo. I think, if anything, Jose Aldo laces combinations really well together. I think that body shot, overhand right could be a path to victory for Aldo. However, I think Jonathan Martinez here is just too young, too strong, too in his prime to lose. I think that he might chop Aldo's legs off, and if not for TKO, I think a decision victory. But I do like a second round TKO here from Jonathan Martinez. I think just the length and the size is going to give Aldo a lot of trouble, and we'll see how it plays out, though, I guess. Which leads us to the main event. We have flyweight champion Alejandro Pantoja versus Astro Boy Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg, 12-1 record, 3-0 in the UFC. This guy has had a quick rise to where he needed to go in the flyweight division. His most recent victory was a KO win over Matt Schnell. And honestly, I think Astro Boy Steve Erceg here is a super well-rounded flyweight. I think he is about to take the flyweight division by storm. I think he is, if he can follow his jab in this fight versus Pantoja, he doesn't leave a lot of openings to be countered. I think if he follows that jab, Pantoja, he has a lot of success when countering off the jab. Versus Royval, versus Moreno, these guys throw their jab, they like to slip off to the side. Astro Boy has a nice long jab. He keeps his punches on the end of his combinations. I think Pantoja is going to have to get inside and take Erceg down here. With that being said, it's going to be easier said than done. He has a tall frame for that flyweight division. Pantoja's 11-3 in the UFC, no slouch. I've seen him in wars versus Figueiredo, Moreno, Royval. He, however, has had his focus elsewhere, I think, for this camp. He's been talking a lot about the bantamweight champ, Sean O'Malley. He's been talking about other contenders in the division. I think he's looking everywhere but right in front of him when he's got a tough guy in Steve Erceg fighting him this weekend. I think if I had to predict this fight, Steve Erceg keeps him at the end of that jab. I like Erceg by decision this week. I think Steve Erceg is going to be the flyweight champion. We'll check back next week and see how it went, but those are my picks. Those are my breakdowns for UFC 301. Thank you guys for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe, and see you next week.